I can't help but think of that moment that altered everything when I smelled jasmine. It was a Tuesday, but when your world is spinning, it doesn't really matter what day of the week it is. I was in the kitchen, the lovely, almost overpowering aroma of the jasmine flowers Joshua had brought home the previous evening, blending with the aroma of coffee brewing. He always did that, bringing small bits of the outside world inside our house, as though to tell us that even when things seemed to be coming apart, life was still lovely. I recall how the sun's warmth filtered through the window, illuminating everything with a golden glow that made the mundane seem almost magical. With his head resting on his paws, Odin stood at my feet, his eyes watching me every step of the way with a devotion that at times seemed to be the only thing I could rely on. I was getting ready for another day at the agency that morning where I helped people, families, and kids get through their most trying times. My job served as a haven where I could put my empathy into practice and help people while also possibly benefiting myself in some tiny manner. However, as I reached for the sugar, my palm hesitated in mid-air, causing a chill to go down my spine. Not from the morning's chilly, but rather from the memory of the night before. Although Joshua's tardiness was normal for his position, there was something off about him. His normally vibrant eyes appeared aloof and haunted. He merely kissed me on the forehead, which felt more like a farewell than a greeting, without saying anything else. As I stood there, the coffee forgotten, I tried to dismiss the feeling, blaming it on stress or exhaustion, but I felt something was amiss, something that went beyond the normal ups and downs of our existence. The morning stillness was broken when the phone rang. Sarah, one of my coworkers, spoke in an agitated tone. "You must see this, Amy." She gave a link to a news item without providing any other details. When I clicked on it, the headline read, "Local software engineer implicated in corporate espionage scandal," and my heart fell. Joshua's name was there connected to a crime that had nothing to do with the man I knew and loved. He was accused of stealing confidential information from his business and selling it to rivals according to the story. My thoughts were racing, attempting to make sense of this in light of the man who had just brought me jasmine flowers and kissed me good night. Odin sensed my sadness and placed his head on my lap, providing wordless consolation as I sat down the chair, feeling chilly against my skin. How is this possible, Joshua, with his honesty and enthusiasm for our straightforward moral existence? When the doorbell rang, I snapped out of my reverie. I had never seen Detective Miller at my door, but I had seen him in courtrooms. His eyes scanned me as though looking for something, and his expression was stern. "We need to talk about your husband, Mrs. Amy," he continued steadily. However, there was a hint of haste and mistrust in the sharpness of it. My thoughts were racing with anxiety and bewilderment as I escorted him into the living room. What could potentially rock the foundations of my existence, which seemed to be perfect, with every new revelation becoming more startling than the last? The answer was being revealed to me. The life we had created together was now being examined closely, with every aspect of it being checked for indications of dishonesty. Joshua. My Joshua was not the man I believed I knew. Each of the detectives' painstaking, in depth questioning eroded the facade of our lives. Had I spotted anything out of the ordinary? Was Joshua absent in any way that couldn't be explained? Did he ever make any strange remarks about his work? The life I loved was slipping through my fingers like sand, and with every response, I felt the ground beneath me disintegrate. I came to the realization that the secret I had been struggling with, the one that threatened to ruin everything, was about more than just Joshua as Detective Miller walked out, his comments reverberating throughout the now quiet house. It was about me, the decisions I would need to make, and the reality I would have to confront. My once warm and humorous life was now overshadowed by uncertainty, treachery, and the overwhelming burden of discovering the truth wherever it might lead. The weight of the day's discoveries weighed me down like a physical force as I sat in the community center's peaceful nook. It seemed as though the children's laughter and the quiet murmur of conversations around me were from a different world. In sharp contrast to the chaos in my heart, I observed Odin playing with the children, his tail bouncing. Normally a source of comfort, the center suddenly felt like a stage on which my life was being performed for an invisible audience. Fear, bewilderment, and a frantic need for clarity were all mixed together in my mind. I kept thinking about Joshua's face and his frightened eyes from the previous evening. I was engrossed in this fantasy when a quiet, unexpected voice interrupted. Are you all right, Amy? It was an old volunteer, Mrs. Thompson, who had always been nice to me. Her eyes were searching mine for an answer I wasn't prepared to provide, and her concern was real. I'm simply exhausted, Mrs. Thompson. I succeeded, speaking hardly louder than a whisper. Her look was one of comprehension as she nodded, but there was a tinge of mistrust, or perhaps age's wisdom. You know, dear, she remarked in a soft yet inquisitive tone, sometimes the quietest moments reveal the loudest truths. Her remarks resonated. The quietness of my unresolved questions regarding Joshua was now resonating through the center's tranquility, the very place I had come to for peace. I made an effort to grin, but it was inauthentic. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, I said, turning back to look at Odin, who had now taken up residence at my feet with his head resting on my lap after seeing my discomfort. At that moment, the center's entrance opened more forcefully than normal, and a man I didn't recognize entered. He had a tall build, a serious expression, and a commanding presence. He looked around the room, and almost instantly his gaze came to rest on me. As he came closer, his stride deliberate. My heart skipped a beat. Mrs. Samey, he said in a rich voice. Yes, that's me, I said, sounding more composed than I actually was. He pulled out his badge and introduced himself as Detective Harris. I must talk to you regarding your husband. It's critical. I felt cold at the thought of Joshua. The outside world was once again encroaching on this haven of caring and camaraderie, and this time with bad news. How about Joshua? With a strong, anxious tone. I questioned. Detective Harris took a seat next to me, his presence commanding yet somehow reassuring in its bluntness. In the case against him, we have discovered fresh evidence. I need to ask certain questions, and you need to know some things. My thoughts were racing. Fresh proof. What might that signify? Was the noose tightening around Joshua's neck, or was his innocence being established? The detective's subsequent remarks were a gut punch. On his computer, we discovered encrypted data that weren't related to his job description. They included private data about the rivals of his business. It felt like the room was spinning. Files that are encrypted. Joshua had always been proficient with computers and loved solving puzzles and codes, but I had no idea. My voice was a mixture of betrayal and perplexity as I mumbled. Detective Harris's eyes grew a little softer. Mrs. Amy, we know you're shocked, but we need your help. Was there ever anything out of the ordinary regarding Joshua's work? Any calls at odd hours, confidential gatherings? Feeling the burden of my ignorance, I shook my head. No such kind of thing doesn't exist. He was simply Joshua, Joshua of mine. The detective took notes while nodding. We will also need to examine your home PC. We may be able to locate more. The idea of strangers invading our house and personal lives felt like an invasion. But what was my option? Whatever the truth was, it had to be revealed. Detective Harris got up to go, but he stopped and turned to face me. I'm sorry you're going through this, Mrs. Amy, but keep in mind that sometimes peace comes from facing the truth, no matter how difficult it may be. Calm. Now the word seemed alien, as though it belonged to another life rather than mine. With a finality that reverberated throughout the now quiet center, I watched him walk out the door. With his moist nose serving as a reminder of the present, Odin pushed against my hand. As I gazed down into his unconditionally loving eyes, I realized that I was never alone. However, the road ahead remained hazy, teeming with uncertainty, and the difficult undertaking of discovering the truth about Joshua and us once a haven of comfort. The community center now echoed my collapsing world, and the burden of my obligations, both at work and now at home, felt more pressing than ever as I got ready to depart. However, beneath the bewilderment and the anxiety, a resolution was beginning to take shape. For Joshua, for myself, and for our shared future, I would discover the truth. I was sitting there thinking when Odin, being his typical mischievous self, approached me. However, he behaved differently this time. He was more demanding and affectionate. I found myself reacting to his approaches in a totally uncharacteristic manner since I was alone and emotionally confused. What began as a moment of comfort with Odin left me grappling with overwhelming guilt and confusion. I found myself emotionally unraveling, unsure of how to process the storm inside me while listening to the far off noises of children laughing. I felt like a ton of bricks when I realized what I had done. I was overcome with feelings of betrayal toward Joshua, uncertainty, and remorse. I realized I had to face this new level of complexity in my life as the consequences of my actions weighed heavily on me. No one else knew what had happened, but I felt the world's eyes on me as I got to my feet. Odin moaned softly, his tail no longer wagging as he sensed my distress. I had to go to think things out on my own. The cool evening air did little to calm the fury inside of me as I left the community center. Each hefty step I took echoed the seriousness of my predicament. My mind kept playing back the image at the center, and the drive home was a haze. How did I allow this to occur? What did this reveal about my marriage and myself? One devastating question after another was asked incessantly. When I got home, the silence was overwhelming. The absence of Joshua and the house's emptiness felt like a condemnation. I sat on the couch, the same one that had been the scene of innumerable moments of love and laughter between Joshua and me, but now tarnished by my behavior. I had to speak with someone, but to whom? My coworker Sarah was out of the question. She was too familiar with the circumstances at work. Mrs. Thompson's statement that the loudest truths are revealed in the quietest moments stuck in my head. But in this confusion, what truth could be found? The silence was broken as my phone vibrated. Detective Harris had sent me a message asking if I could visit the station the next day to be questioned in more detail. My heart fell. More inquiries that go deeper into our life and now into my soul. I chose to give Laura, my sister, a call. Although she resided out of state, she was close enough in heart to comprehend the commotion, yet far enough away to avoid it. In the sea of my hopelessness, her speech was a lifeline. What's wrong, Amy? Laura's voice was a soothing salve, and her care was instantaneous. The words stopped in my throat as I paused. I've done something, Laura, that I can't even begin to describe. Tell me, Amy. There was a pause. Tell me anything you want. I described everything that had happened that day, including Joshua's involvement in a scandal and my own startling actions at the community center. After a brief period of silence, Laura responded in a forceful yet gentle tone. You're under a lot of pressure, Amy. You're not like this, however, you must confront this for your own sake as much as Joshua's. You must discover what is real and true in your life. Her remarks served as a mirror reflecting back to me my own perplexity and desire for clarification. Laura, I understand. I simply feel completely lost. Amy, you're not alone. Odin, me, and your work, which you adore, are all in your possession. Nevertheless, you must go through this step by step. She couldn't see me nodding, but I did. Tomorrow, I'll visit the station. I'll see what they know and what Joshua may have been up to. Laura also reminded Amy that no matter what you discover, you remain who you are. You're still the kind of woman that gives to others and has a great heart. Keep this from defining who you are. Her support was a glimmer of hope among the shadows. Even though the road ahead was still unclear, I felt a little more grounded after thanking her. Sleep was elusive that night. The empty room next to me as I laid in bed served as a sharp reminder that Joshua was not there. Always faithful, Odin reclined at the foot of the bed, his presence a quiet solace. With a troubled heart, I got ready for the station visit the following morning. I noticed my image in the mirror while I was getting dressed. The older woman who was staring back at me had the world's weight in her eyes. Detective Harris nodded at me at the station, his face inscrutable. Thank you for coming. Mrs. Amy Moore, information regarding the encrypted files has come to light. I took a seat and prepared myself. What did you discover? These files seem to have been a part of a bigger plan. We're investigating potential international business partnerships. We may have underestimated Joshua's level of involvement. The room whirled a little foreign. Nothing like it was ever said by Joshua. We recognize that this is a lot to process. Your finances and any odd communications or transactions will need to be examined. I nodded as I felt the ground give way even more. Is there anything else? Detective Harris took a moment then went on. Additionally, we discovered some private correspondence that raises the possibility that Joshua was under duress. It is possible that he was forced to do this. Forced, the word lingered, a glimmer of optimism amid the gloom. For him, what does that mean? It implies that we must delve further and comprehend the entire situation. However, it also suggests that your husband may not be the antagonist in this tale. Mrs. Amy, the journey home was introspective. My viewpoint changed when I considered that Joshua might not be a criminal, but rather a victim. Not only for Joshua, but also for our future and the truth that was hidden beneath layers of dishonesty and uncertainty. I needed to learn more. Odin and I sat together at home, his head resting on my lap and his eyes providing the little comfort I could find. Once a haven of comfort, the community center now echoed my collapsing world. However, beneath the bewilderment and the anxiety, a resolution was beginning to take shape. For Joshua, for myself, and for our shared future, I would discover the truth. Finding the truth about Joshua and about us was a difficult undertaking, and the road ahead was fraught with doubtful shadows, but with Laura's help and Odin at my side. I knew I wasn't alone. Although the path to truth would be difficult, it would be essential for understanding peace and the opportunity to mend what had been damaged. The days after the incident passed quickly. With my guilt gnawing at me, I avoided Joshua, unwilling to meet his gaze. Odin, noticing the shift, grew more needy, which made me regret it even more. I made an effort to explain what I had done, telling myself it was a weakness or a mistake in judgment. In actuality, though I had gone too far and would never be able to turn back, I considered telling Joshua. But I refrained because I was afraid of losing him and ruining our relationship. My work suffered. My coworkers saw that I was distracted and making blunders. Once a haven, the community center now felt like the scene of my crime. I awoke each morning with a heavy heart. The consequences of my deeds weighing me down like a tangible weight, still untouchable. Joshua's side of the bed would serve as a sharp reminder of his absence whenever I looked at it. In sharp contrast to the chill that had taken hold of my spirit, Odin would nuzzle me. I made an effort to concentrate on my clients at work, but my mind was elsewhere. I was meant to help them through their darkest moments and serve as a ray of hope. But here I was engrossed in my own whirlpool. One afternoon, my boss noticed that I was distracted and drew me aside. You haven't been at your best recently. Amy, are things going well at home? Although there was worry in her voice, I couldn't bring myself to tell the truth. It's just private matters, I succeeded, speaking hardly louder than a whisper. She gave me the space I didn't deserve by nodding in understanding, but without pressuring. Once a place of calm, the community center now reverberated with the quiet of my guilt. I could feel the volunteers and the kids' stares every time I entered, reminding me of what I had done without judgment. With her soft wisdom, Mrs. Thompson came up to me once more, her gaze probing. You look distressed, my love. Would you like to share anything? Her generosity was nearly intolerable. With the words trapped in my throat, I shook my head. I avoided looking into her eyes and said, I'm just dealing with some things. I sat by myself in our living room that night, and the silence was deafening. With my thumb resting on Joshua's contact, I pulled up my phone. I wanted to call him, confess, and ask for forgiveness, but I was paralyzed by my fear of his response and of losing him. Rather, I called Laura once more. It's getting worse, Laura. My voice broke as I admitted it. Joshua is too much for me. I am unable to face myself. A lifeline was Laura's voice. You have to face this, Amy, for your own serenity as much as Joshua's. Helping others find their way has always been your responsibility. You must now take the same action for yourself. It was a bitter pill that she said. Even though I knew she was correct, it seemed impossible to turn around. Detective Harris called me again the following day. We've made some headway, Mrs. Amy. Come down to the station once more, please. Detective Harris was waiting at the station, his expression grim. More evidence of coercion has been discovered. Emails and messages show that Joshua was in danger. A mixture of fear and hope made my heart leap. What threats? Although it's complicated, it has to do with his personal safety and potentially his family. We are assembling it. There were two sides to the revelation. On the one hand, it portrayed Joshua as a victim rather than a monster. On the other hand, it suggested that something much more hazardous than I had thought was intertwining our lives. My mind was racing with feelings as I drove home. Did Joshua get away with being coerced? Was I cleared by it? The distinction between good and wrong became even more hazy. Odin and I sat together at home, his head resting on my lap and his eyes beaming with unwavering love. As I stroked his fur, I felt the weight of my betrayal, not only to Joshua, but also to this naive creature that unconditionally loved me. I was startled out of my reverie by the sound of the doorbell. Mrs. Thompson was there, with a worried expression on her face. I wanted to see how you were doing, sweetie. You haven't said much lately. It was consoling to have her there. Another reminder of my deceit. My voice was empty as I said, I'm just trying to sort things out. Her hand was on mine as she sat next to me. Internal conflicts can sometimes be the most difficult to overcome. Do not forget that you are not alone, my love. Her remarks, which were intended to be consoling, instead made me feel more alone. How could I really express my emotions to her or to anyone else? As she walked away, I made the decision that it was time to speak with Joshua, take responsibility for my actions, and get the truth, no matter how unpleasant it might be. Hardening my resolve. I picked up my phone. When he responded, I shook my voice and said, Joshua, we must speak. I have certain things I need to share with you. A pause, a thick hush fell. Finally, in a tired, aloof voice, he remarked, I'll be home soon. The house felt like it was closing in on me while I waited for him, and every second that passed was a reminder of the ticking time bomb that was my confession. Sensing my nervousness, Odin remained nearby, his presence a subtle comfort. Joshua's face was unreadable when he entered, my heart thumping, my knees wobbly. I stood. I began, Joshua, but I was unable to finish the sentence. In the most unthinkable way, how can you tell the person you love that you have betrayed them? He gazed at me, looking for something. Possibly the truth in my eyes. Amy, what is it? He said softly, almost resignedly. With the weight of my confession bearing down on me, I inhaled deeply. There is something I did that I cannot take back. I was crying, and my voice broke when I was with Odin in the community center. Joshua's face changed from bewilderment to an agonized comprehension. He took a seat with his head in his hands, and the seriousness of what I had said filled the silence between us. Joshua, I'm very sorry. I was overwhelmed and lost. I was unsure of how to deal with it. The words came out as I begged. His face was a mask of pain as he looked up, his eyes crimson. I'm at a loss for words, Amy. Everything is changed by this. It seemed as though the room was spinning. In front of me, my life and our lives were falling apart. There was, however, a glimmer of hope. Amid the mayhem, a possibility for knowledge, truth, and healing. Amy, I have to know everything. Not only this, but also what's going on with me and us. Joshua spoke steadily now, a resolution beginning to take shape. So we had a conversation. We started to remove the layers of dishonesty, fear, and treachery via sobs and quiet suffering and epiphanies. It marked the start of a protracted and difficult trip. It would put our relationship to the test, but it also provided a way to truth, redemption, and maybe even peace in the future. Joshua arrived home earlier than planned one evening. He discovered me in the kitchen, lost in my thoughts and staring blankly at the wall. He pressured me for answers, feeling that something was seriously off. I couldn't handle the burden of my secret alone. I told everything, tears running down my cheeks. A mixture of amazement, revulsion, and sadness characterized Joshua's response. He needed time to absorb what I had just told him, so he left the home. With Odin at my side, I was alone and felt the full consequences of my deeds. Odin's bewildered whimpers and my weeping were the only sounds in the terrible silence of the home. I sat on the couch, the same one that had been the scene of innumerable moments of love and laughter between Joshua and me, but now tarnished by my behavior. The house's emptiness felt like a condemnation, a sharp reminder of the life I might have destroyed. The days that followed were a haze. Joshua failed to return home, so I was on my own to deal with the fallout from our connection. My job at the organization became into a haven where I could temporarily escape my own troubles by immersing myself in those of others. But the guilt still tormented me there. Every family's hardship and every child's laughter appeared to mirror my own shortcomings. Unable to confront the location where my life had taken such a negative turn, I stayed away from the community center. But I felt drawn to the center and its recollections of better days. I walked through its doors one afternoon in the hopes of finding some of the tranquility I had previously experienced. There, Mrs. Thompson, always perceptive, smiled softly at me. "You look like you've been through a storm, Amy," she stated in a gentle yet inquisitive tone. I nodded, unable to talk because of the big lump in my throat. She sat next to me, reassuring, but also a reminder of my deceit. "Sometimes the most difficult battles are fought within," she added. "This is not unique to you." Her remarks, which were intended to be consoling, instead made me feel more alone. How could I really express my emotions to her or to anyone else? As she walked away, I made the decision that it was time to speak with Joshua, take responsibility for my actions, and get the truth, no matter how unpleasant it might be. Hardening my resolve, I picked up my phone. When he responded, I shook my voice and said, "Joshua, we must speak. I have certain things I need to share with you." A pause, a thick hush fell. Finally, in a tired, aloof voice, he remarked, "I'll be home soon." Joshua's face was unreadable when he entered. My heart thumping, my knees wobbly, I stood. I began, "Joshua," but I was unable to finish the sentence. "In the most unthinkable way, how can you tell the person you love that you have betrayed them?" He gazed at me, looking for something. Possibly the truth in my eyes. "Amy, what is it?" he said softly, almost resignedly. With the weight of my confession bearing down on me, I inhaled deeply. "There is something I did that I cannot take back." I was crying, and my voice broke at the community center. With Odin, Joshua's face changed from one of perplexity to one of agonized comprehension. He took a seat with his head in his hands, and the seriousness of what I had said filled the silence between us. "Joshua, I'm very sorry. I was overwhelmed and lost. I was unsure of how to deal with it." The words came out as I begged. His face was a mask of pain as he looked up, his eyes crimson. "I'm at a loss for words, Amy. Everything is changed by this." It seemed as though the room was spinning. In front of me, my life and our lives were falling apart. There was, however, a glimmer of hope. Amid the mayhem, a possibility for knowledge, truth, and healing. "Amy, I have to know everything. Not only this, but also what's going on with me and us." Joshua spoke steadily now, a resolution beginning to take shape. So we had a conversation. We started to remove the layers of dishonesty, fear, and treachery via sobs and quiet suffering and epiphanies. Joshua told his story of being forced to do something against his will, of being threatened, and of being afraid. It was a missing piece of the puzzle, but it wasn't an excuse. We talked about the encrypted data, the inquiry, and the potential that Joshua is not the story's antagonist. There were times during the frank chat when we both wondered if we would ever be able to go past this. However, there was also a common desire to comprehend, to mend, and possibly to recreate what had been damaged. We sat together in a new, brittle understanding as the night grew darker rather than in love as we had in the past. A silent link between us. Odin laid at our feet with his head resting on each of our laps as he sensed the change. Finding the truth about Joshua and about us was a difficult undertaking, and the road ahead was fraught with doubtful shadows. But with Laura's help and Odin at my side, I knew I wasn't alone. Although the path to truth would be difficult, it would be essential for understanding peace and the opportunity to mend what had been damaged. I woke up the following morning with a heavy heart but a renewed resolution. For the first time in days, Joshua's face was calm and he was still asleep. I felt a mixture of hope, guilt, and love as I watched him. We had a long journey ahead of us, one that involved personal healing, court cases, and treatment. But I felt like we were facing it together for the first time. The aroma of coffee, which had once been comforting but was now tinted with the complexity of our situation, filled the kitchen as I made it. Joshua's eyes locked with mine as he joined me, and we silently decided to attempt to resolve this and find a way to get back together. Once a haven of comfort, the community center now echoed my collapsing world. However, beneath the bewilderment and the anxiety, a resolution was beginning to take shape. For Joshua, for myself, and for our shared future, I would discover the truth. Standing there with Joshua at my side, I realized that even if the road ahead was unclear, it was ours to travel together in an attempt to save what remained of our marriage. Joshua and I went to counseling in the weeks that followed. Every session was a voyage across an emotional minefield. There were times when the anguish was so great that it seemed like we were both being ripped apart. But there were also moments of comprehension and forgiveness, like we were repairing a broken mirror and finding images of our former selves in the pieces. It wasn't just us in the sessions, they had to do with me facing my personal issues. I pursued individual treatment, exploring the depths of my mind to figure out why I had behaved in such an uncharacteristic manner. Finding long buried worries and insecurities that had caused that moment of insanity with Odin was a hard excavation. Our cherished cat Odin turned into a terrible reminder of my treachery. We had to make the tough choice to place him with a family friend. Although it was a difficult farewell, it was essential to our recovery. It was a step toward regaining our privacy, our haven, but the house felt more empty without him. The episode remained a tragic chapter in our lives, but life went on. I came to accept my error as a lesson in human weakness rather than as a turning point in my life. Despite his intense pain, Joshua chose to remain. Although our relationship was permanently altered, a new foundation based on openness and honesty, where we both recognized our weaknesses, was being established. Will Amy and Joshua never be able to move on from this betrayal, or will it always be there? As we adapted to our new normal, the question continued to torment me. It is difficult to restore trust once it has been damaged. It's comparable to a bone that mends yet stays sensitive where it broke. Day by day, Joshua and I gradually restored our trust. We realized that although love is strong, it is also vulnerable. We made a conscious decision each day to go on and not let the past define us. We discussed everything from the commonplace to the important. Joshua talked more about his experience, the threats that forced him to behave against his will, and the coercion he encountered. It was a piece of the puzzle that allowed me see him as a man who had been pushed to his limits rather than just a victim, but it wasn't an excuse. The court case involving Joshua was still pending. Detective Harris kept us informed, and the image grew clearer with every new piece of evidence. The bad guy wasn't Joshua. In a much bigger game, he was a pawn. There was a mixture of relief and sadness at this understanding, hope that he could be cleared. I'm sorry for what he'd gone through. The echo of our suffering and our attempts to recover now filled our home, which had previously been a place of love and laughter. While the investigation was ongoing, Joshua's employer let him to work from home. This close proximity presented both advantages and difficulties. Even though we were together, there was a noticeable void between us that was haunted by the ghosts of the past. I went back to the community center in search of comfort rather than as a volunteer. Mrs. Thompson welcomed me with her customary tenderness, looking into my eyes to see if I had survived a storm. Dear, you look like you've been through a storm, she said in a gentle yet inquisitive tone. I've tried to find my way back, but I have, Mrs. Thompson, I answered with a solid voice that demonstrated my determination. She gave a nod, her face showing comprehension. Keep in mind, my love, that the biggest truths are frequently revealed at the quietest moments. As I sat in the corner where I had previously found serenity, her words replayed in my head. It was now a space for introspection where I could face my decisions, my deeds, and my future. Like two planets in the same orbit, Joshua and I were pulled together by gravity, but each had our own atmosphere of grief, hope, and guilt. We discussed our goals, the future, and whether or not we could actually get over this. The eagerness to attempt was evident in the air between us, even though the answer was unclear. We were sitting on the couch one evening, and the silence seemed lighter than usual. Joshua tentatively stretched for my hand, asking for my consent. I silently agreed to keep trying as I squeezed his hand back. Amy, we'll get through this, he remarked in a stern but kind voice. Although it won't be the same, it might be something stronger and fresh. I nodded, tears streaming down my face, not from sorrow, but from the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could use the ashes of our history to create something lovely. It was far from the end of the journey, legal battles, personal mending, and rebuilding a trust that would never be the same were all on the agenda. But while Joshua's hand was in mine, I sensed a glimmer of calm and a glimmer of the possibility that we could still be together in the future. Once a sanctuary of comfort, the community center now contained the echoes of my collapsing world, along with the opening notes of a new tune, one of understanding, redemption, and maybe even a rekindled love. If you like this tale, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. This will enable us to produce stories for you that are more captivating.